Many years ago, I'm going to say at least 15 years ago, I was at church attending a singles conference, and there were easily a couple of hundred singles there, and we were listening to a guest speaker encourage us in our spiritual walk. And suddenly someone ran into the sanctuary and they asked if there was a doctor or a nurse present because there had been some type of medical emergency. And so one or two people got up and ran out of the sanctuary with them. And then we turned our attention back to the guest speaker. Well, all of a sudden there were these words in my head, and words, no sound, but it was, we've got to pray, we've got to pray, we've got to pray, we've got to pray, we've got to pray. And it was going so fast, I cannot physically say it as fast as it was running through my head. And it caught my attention, and honestly, I was like, well, that's kind of weird. I didn't really know what to make of it. But then about a few seconds later, a young lady sitting a few pews behind me stood up and she said, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the Holy Spirit is telling me that we've got to pray. And I was like, oh my gosh, of course, that's the Holy Spirit speaking to me. Felt a little embarrassed about that. And so, she said a prayer, and, the guest speaker allowed it. And then we moved on. I later heard that one of the deacons at the church had passed out. I don't know if that's true or not, but I later heard that that was the nature of the medical emergency. And when I think back on that, it just strikes me as unusual for two reasons. One is, the words were, we've got to pray, we've got to pray, we have to pray. Why wasn't it talking to me, you've got to pray, you've got to pray, but it was inviting us as a community to pray, and God's Holy Spirit saying we've got to pray. I mean, it's just like the Holy Spirit was part of it. I just hadn't encountered that before. And then also just the fact that God was prompting us to pray in that moment. Normally it's an automatic human response to pray for something or someone when there's an emergency situation, but I've never had the experience where God is saying, you've got to pray about this, you've got to pray about this. So yeah, it's just something that I still ponder to this day. The deacon's fine. If it was that deacon, he's fine. He did make it through that situation. And it's really interesting and amazing that God would interrupt the situation and intervene and move upon a community of believers that were gathered in His name in order to prompt us to pray, because there's power in prayer, and God was clearly saying that this is a situation that warrants prayer because He cares about us.